In a world plagued by generic noise, one goblin can save us all.
Hey gang, just to let you know, you can now use the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, at flipsidegaming.com and originalmagicart.store. Using the code gets you 10% off orders $10 or more, and you get to help out the channel at the same time. Hey gang, and welcome back. This is another GP New Jersey / MagicFest New Jersey / whatever you want to call it game. We have 4 brand new people to the channel, with Braden playing his Arch-Chancellor of Artifacts, Daretti, keeping an Everflowing Chalice, 2 Mountains, a Mox Opal, Stolen Strategy, Trading Post, and Loyal Apprentice. We got Anton playing the King of Cascades, Maelstrom Wanderer, keeping a Xenagos, Acidic Slime, a Mountain, a Taiga, a Strip Mine, and a Commander Sphere. Geo is playing the mysterious merfolk Tuvasa with a tribal deck, keeping an Island, a Commander Sphere, a Skull Clamp, Mana Confluence, Sea of Clouds, 3 Dreams, and Merfolk Mistbinder. And lastly, Brendan is playing Ramos, who might be colorless, but he certainly loves his colored spells. He keeps a Windswept Heath, a Forest, a Command Tower, a Sea of Clouds, an Isolated Chapel, a Blood Crypt, and Nicol Bolas Planeswalker. Geo wins the die roll and starts us off. Geo plays a Sea of Clouds, and he casts Skull Clamp, passing. Braden plays a Mountain, and he casts the Mana Vault he just drew. He then plays a Mox Opal, and then an unkicked Everflowing Chalice to achieve the fabled turn 1 Daretti. He upticks Daretti, discarding 1 and drawing 1, and passes turn. Anton plays a Taiga, and passes. Brendan plays a Windswept Heath, passing. Geo plays an Island, and he casts a Merfolk Mistbinder, passing. We quickly realize he can't actually do this, so he swaps an Island for the Mana Confluence from his hand, and he takes the one he would have taken normally. Braden takes 1 for Mana Vault on his upkeep, and he plays an Arcane Lighthouse. He then casts a Loyal Apprentice, and moves to combat making a Thopter token. He hits Anton for 2 with the Apprentice, and in his second main phase, upticks Daretti, discarding 1 and drawing 1. At the end of turn, Brendan cracks a Windswept Heath to find a land. Anton plays a Forest for his turn, and he passes. Brendan settles on a Sacred Foundry, and shuffles before drawing for turn. He plays a Polluted Delta, and he passes. Geo plays an Island for his turn, and we see an Oblivion Ring hit the field, and he takes 1. He exiles Daretti, and Braden sends his commander to the command zone. Moving to combat, the Mistbinder then hits Braden for 2. Braden loses another 1 to his vault, and he plays a Mountain for his turn. He then casts a Ruby Medallion, and passes, forgetting to make a Thopter during his combat step sadly. Anton plays a Mountain for his turn, and we see a Commander Sphere hit the stack. He then taps the Sphere for his own copy of Mana Vault, and passes while Brendan cracks his Polluted Delta to go and find a Watery Grave. Brendan continues to play every Shockland in existence tapped, and this time drops a Blood Crypt, passing. Geo drops a Forest, and he casts his Commander Sphere. He then puts the Clamp onto the Mistbinder, and sends the Merfolk at Anton for 3. Braden loses another 1 on his upkeep, and he draws for his turn. He casts a Stolen Strategy in his main phase, and he passes. Anton draws for turn, and plays a Strip Mine. He casts a Maelstrom Wanderer, and he double cascades. He hits a Whelming Wave, bouncing basically all non-seafood based creatures back to their opponent's hands, and then cascades into Ethereum Horn Sorcerer, who then in turn cascades into a Manglehorn. He blows up the Skull Clamp as it enters, and he then moves to combat. He swings the Maelstrom Wanderer at Geo for 7, and the 2 other creatures at Braden for 5. Brendan plays a Forest, and passes. We then see a 3 Dreams in Geo's main phase, and he goes to find 3 auras. He grabs Octopus Umbra, Rancor, and Steel of the Godhead. He puts them to his hand, and passes. Braden resolves the Stolen Strategy trigger first, and we see a land from Brendan, Hull Breach from Anton, and True Name Nemesis from Geo. Braden then loses 1 from the vault, and in his main phase, Braden casts Hull Breach to destroy the Sorcerer, and he passes turn. Anton takes 1 on his upkeep to his vault trigger, and he plays a Forest. He then casts Xenagos, and he moves to combat. He puts the Xenagos trigger on the Maelstrom Wanderer, and swings him at Braden for 14 commander damage, and he swings a Manglehorn at Brendan for 2. With nothing else, he passes. Brendan plays a Command Tower for turn, and he casts a Coiling Oracle. He reveals a Crackling Doom, and puts it to his hand before passing. Geo recasts his Mistbinder in his main phase, taking 1, and then taps the rest of his mana to drop Tuvasa. He then passes to Braden. Braden loses 1 to his vault trigger, and we then see more cards get exiled from his opponents. He draws for turn and casts Anton's Malignus in his main phase. He then plays a tap Forgotten Cave and passes. Anton takes another one from his Vault trigger this time, and he then casts a Zealous Conscripts and steals back Malignus. He puts the Xenagos trigger on Malignus and swings it at Geo, and swings the Maelstrom at Braden and the rest at Braden. Geo stops Malignus with his Mistbinder, and before moving to damage, Braden casts Abzan Charn, choosing the first mode to exile Xenagos. Braden then takes 5, while Geo's Mistbinder dies. Unfortunately for Braden, he has no blockers and dies to commander damage. With Braden dying though, we also think that Malignus gets exiled because although it's Anton's card, Braden cast it. It was a bit confusing, needless to say. Braden plays an Isolated Chapel as his land for turn, and pays 6 to cast Ramos, passing. Geo draws for turn, and casts Rancor and Tuvasa, drawing as it's his first enchantment spell of the turn. He then plays Yavimaya Hollow as his land for turn, and then taps the rest of his mana, taking 1 to cast Octopus Umbra. He then passes. Anton takes another one from his Vault trigger, and draws for turn. He pays 5 to cast an Acidic Slime, which sadly blows up the earlier mentioned Umbra. Anton then casts Soothsaying, and he moves to combat. He swings the Maelstrom Wanderer at Geo, and the rest at Braden. Both players declare no blocks and take the hits of 7. Braden plays a Sea of Clouds and passes to Geo. Geo plays a tap Path of Ancestry as his land for turn, and he drops Enchanted Evening. This really ramps up Tuvasa's power, but Geo plays defensively, keeping his commander back and passing. Anton pays to untap his Vault on his upkeep and draws for turn. He then follows Geo's example, and with a bit of a standoff happening, he passes to Braden. Braden doesn't care for this plan, and at the end of turn, casts Windgrace's Judgment, giving Ramos 2 +1/+1 counters, and then blows up Enchanted Evening and the Mana Vault. With the targets on the stack though, Anton activates his Vault to put 3 mana into Soothsaying and looks at the top 3 and rearranges them. Braden plays a Mountain for his turn, and he casts his own Maelstrom Wanderer, gaining 3 more +1/+1 counters for Ramos. He hits an Anguished Unmaking, adding more counters to Ramos, losing 3 life, and exiling Rancor. His second hit is the Hardened Scales, giving Ramos another counter as he casts it. Braden then removes 5 counters from Ramos in exchange for 2 of each color of mana, and uses most of it to cast Nicol Bolas, Planeswalker. This gives Ramos 3 more counters, plus 1 from the Hardened Scales. Braden then uses Bolas' ability to gain control of Anton's Acidic Slime, and he moves to combat. He swings Ramos at Anton for 11 commander damage, who can't block the flying Mecha Dragon. With nothing else, he passes to Geo. Geo draws for turn and plays a Plains. He puts the Steel of the Godhead onto Tuvasa, drawing a card as he casts it from Tuvasa's ability. Moving to combat, Geo swings Tuvasa at Braden. As Tuvasa is unblockable from the Godhead enchantment, Braden removes another 5 counters from Ramos to help cast Crackling Doom. This will force Anton and Geo to sacrifice their largest power creature and then take 2 damage, while also giving Ramos 4 more counters. Before letting the counter trigger resolve though, Geo uses Beast Within to blow up Ramos. The Crackling Doom then resolves, and Anton and Geo both have to sacrifice their commanders and take 2 damage. Anton cultivates in his main phase, grabbing an island for the field and 1 for his hand. He then plays the island from his hand, and he moves to combat. He swings everything at Nicol Bolas, and Braden blocks like so. With the blockers declared, Anton flashes Inventor to bounce the Acidic Slime back to his hand. And the Maelstrom Wanderer then kills the Manglehorn. Braden plays a Swamp for his turn and recasts Ramos. He then upticks Bolas in his main phase, blowing up Soothsaying, and moving to Braden's end step, Geo sacrifices his Commander Sphere to draw a card. We see a Stony Brook Banneret in Geo's main phase, which lets him scry because he used his Path of Ancestry. He keeps the card on top, and then drops a Cold-Eyed Selkie. With nothing else, he passes. Anton pays 7 to cast a Diluvian Primordial in his main phase, and targets Geo's Beast Within and Braden's Anguished Unmaking. He puts the Beast Within on Nicol Bolas, and uses the Anguished Unmaking on the Maelstrom Wanderer. Wanting to get in on the fun as well, Geo uses Crib Swap to take out Ramos, and puts an end to the party on Braden's side of the field. And with nothing else, Anton passes. Braden decides to take his toys and go home with Merciless Eviction, exiling all creatures on the board, and he then passes to Geo. Geo recasts Tuvasa in his main phase, scrying 1 and keeping it on top. He then passes. Anton plays an island for his turn, and pays 6 to cast Green Warden of Marasa. He returns Mana Vault to his hand. He then casts a Crystal Shard, passing happily because he has a blocker in case someone attacks him. Brendan's first main phase has him destroying Anton's happiness as a Dragonlord Silumgar enters the field and steals the Green Warden of Marasa. He then passes to Geo. Geo casts a Stony Brook Schoolmaster in his main phase, scrying from the Path of Ancestry. He then takes 1 from the Mana Confluence to cast a Darksteel Mutation on Silumgar. We're pretty sure that doesn't get Anton his creature back sadly, and Geo then draws from the Enchantment Aura as it's his first for the turn. He plays a Forest, and then moves to combat and hits Anton for 3 with Tuvasa. Anton plays an Ancient Ziggurat, and then recasts his Mana Vault in his main phase. We then see the triumphant return of the Maelstrom Wanderer, and Anton cascades into a Species Scorcher and a Mana Crypt. Anton then hits Brendan's command tower with his Strip Mine, and he passes turn. Brendan casts a Farseek in his main phase and goes to grab a Hallowed Fountain, putting it onto the field tapped. We then see the new Lavinia hit the field, and Brendan passes. On Geo's upkeep, Anton activates the Crystal Shard to bounce Lavinia back to Brendan's hand. Without access to blue, and not wanting to pay 3 colorless, Brendan has no choice but to let this happen. Geo then casts a Marrow Harbinger and scries 1, bottoming the card, and then searches for a Merfolk card. He puts a Marrow Commerce on top of his library, and we then see a Lullmage Mentor hit the field. Geo passes, and at the end of turn, Brendan uses Utter End to once more take out Maelstrom Wanderer. Anton takes 1 from the Vault trigger and rolls for his Crypt, failing and taking 3 more. He plays a Mountain as his land for turn, and recasts Maelstrom Wanderer. He hits a Vexing Shusher and Rashmi, and then Maelstrom Wanderer hits the field. He keeps his creatures back as blockers and passes to Brendan. Brendan recasts Lavinia again, and we then see a Karn's Temporal Sundering hit the stack, targeting Brendan. He bounces the Lullmage Mentor back to Geo's hand, and the sorcery exiles itself, and Brendan takes an extra turn. Moving to the extra turn, Brendan casts Void in his main phase. Brendan chooses the number 3 and targets Geo. Firstly, they destroy all artifacts and creatures with converted mana cost of 3. And then Geo reveals his hand, and the only 3-drop just so happens to be the Lullmage Mentor, which he discards. Brendan then swings the Green Warden at Anton, who blocks with the Maelstrom Wanderer. The Green Warden and Maelstrom Wanderer die, and Brendan exiles the Green Warden to return a card to his hand. He grabs the Abzan Charm and puts it to hand. Geo recasts Tuvasa in his main phase, and swings the Harbinger at Brendan for 2 before passing. Anton untaps for his turn, and pays the 4 to untap his Mana Vault. He rolls for his Crypt trigger, failing again and taking 3. We then see a Balefire Dragon hit the stack, which triggers Rashmi's ability. Anton reveals a Maze of Ith, which goes to his hand, and he plays it as his land for turn before passing. Brendan casts his Abzan Charm in his main phase, losing 2 life to draw 2 cards. He plays an Overgrown Tomb untapped, taking 2, and follows up with a Growth Spiral to draw a card. He then passes. Geo casts a Marrow Commerce in his main phase, drawing from Tuvasa. He then plays a Windswept Heath to go and find a land, but shortcuts first by casting a Privileged Position. He then swings everything at Brendan this time, who takes 2 from the Island Walking Harbinger, and blocks Tuvasa with the bug version of Dragonlord Silumgar. At the end of turn, Geo's Merfolk untap. Anton rolls and fails to hit, losing another 3 to his Crypt trigger. He draws and plays a Forest, and pays 14 mana to cast a Wanderer with 1 green floating. This triggers Rashmi, who reveals a Mountain, which he puts to hand. He then cascades into Boundless Realms, which has Lavinia's ability try to counter it. Anton decides to tap his last remaining land and use the floating mana to make it uncounterable, and essentially goes to find all of his remaining basics. He then reveals off the second cascade a Bane of Progress, which unfortunately does get countered by Lavinia's ability. Moving to combat, he swings the Balefire at Brendan for 6, and deals 6 to all of his creatures upon connecting. Brendan casts a Soul Ring in his main phase, and then recasts Ramos, passing. Geo draws for turn and casts Council's Judgment. Geo votes for Ramos, while Anton votes for Ramos as well, and Brendan's the odd man out voting for Balefire. Sadly it's 2 against 1, and Ramos goes back to the command zone. Moving to combat as a gambling man, Geo swings Tuvasa at Brendan, and the Island Walking Harbinger at Anton. At the end of his turn, Geo untaps his Merfolk. Anton untaps his Mana Vault on his upkeep, not wanting to take the 1, and his life comes down to the next roll. Sadly, he whiffs on it, and takes 3 from the crypt and dies. Brendan casts a Winding Conscriptor in his main phase, followed by a Corpsejack Menace. He then casts a Crystalline Crawler, paying 4 different types of mana. This has the Crystalline Crawler come in with 4 +1/+1 counters, which get doubled by the Menace, and then gains an additional bunch of counters from the Scales and the Conscriptor. Brendan then removes some counters from the Crawler and taps 2 lands to recast Ramos, and passes to Geo. Geo draws and puts an Unflinching Courage on his Harbinger. He draws from Tuvasa and swings at Brendan for 4, gaining 4 life. In his second main phase, we see a tapped Seaside Citadel, and he passes. Brendan, stunned at what's on top of his library, draws and casts Conflux. He gains a whopping 14 counters onto Ramos just from casting the spell, and then searches for 5 spells. Knowing his chances have flown the coop once Brendan shows Chance for Glory, Geo extends the hand for a good game. Game review time. So, some people might call Braden lucky for getting that Mana Vault off the top, but others might say otherwise. Unfortunately, getting Daretti out on turn 1 puts a giant target on your head no matter how few cards you have left in hand. He became public enemy number 1, and pretty much everyone ganged up on him until he was out of the game. I would say that this worked heavily in Brendan's favor, as he was able to slowly build up the land base that he needed in order to cast a lot of his color-hungry spells. Even so, it came down to the wire for Brendan to win the game, and Geo certainly gave him a run for his money. Geo's Tuvasa deck is actually a Merfolk tribal deck if you hadn't figured it out. He does run auras to pump his creatures and help draw some cards with Tuvasa, and I really enjoyed the build. It was a bit away from the traditional Enchantress build, which is always fun to see something new. Anton's deck also did a lot of fun stuff, but unfortunately once Braden was dead, Brendan seemed to focus all of his removal on Anton's creatures. As awful as it sounds, it always brings a smile to my face when someone dies to their own mana crypt, so I have to thank Anton for being a good sport about it. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/MTGMudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/MTGMudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.